In the fall of the year 488, a multitude of Germanic barbarians led by King Theodoric withdrew from their places on the Pannonian plains and moved northwest to the Alpine mountains. Their target was the Italian kingdom of Odoacer, a disgraced patrician who by then had already ruled successfully for 13 years, backed by an army of former Germanic mercenaries of the empire. This was the last classic Germanic invasion of the Great Migration of peoples. The Ostgoths sought to take over a former province of the empire, occupy major positions in the government, and rule as a military class, receiving their one-third of the income from the conquered population. In this case, it is interesting to note that in Italy, which Theodoric claimed, Odoacer's multifarious mercenaries had already settled in a similar way, so that the common people remained in the role of an observer, a herd of herbivores, contemplating the fight between two predators, deciding who would hunt this territory in the future. But let us roll back a few years to understand the reasons that prompted the Germans, who for more than 100 years lived near the Danube on the border with the Eastern Roman Empire, to begin their Great Migration. After the collapse of Attila the Hun's empire, the Ostgoths, who migrated from the steppes of the Black Sea to the southwest and occupied the fertile plain of future eastern Hungary, were the main beneficiaries of the fall of their former hegemons, and began to conduct their own policy with their neighbors and Byzantium, which paid for their services as federates with gold and grain. After the Battle of Bolia, in which the Ostgoths defeated a coalition of small tribes dissatisfied with the strengthening of the kingdom of Theodemir and his relatives, the royal family of Amalus, the Ostgoths began to dominate the Balkans. Emperor Xenon, all the first half of his reign, had to reckon with the Stropi Goths, who interfered in the simmering internal politics of the empire, supporting one or the other candidate for the throne, bargaining for gold, grain, and territories. The main mass of Gothic mercenaries in the empire was led by the commander Theodoric Strabo, slant-eyed, from the royal family of Amalov, who possessed an army perhaps even larger than the kingdom itself could put up Pannonian Goths. Zeno successfully maneuvered between the two Theodorics, but the horse on which rode Theodoric Strabo lapped that to the tent, wherein the side of the poor man entered, sticking their spear. The wound was fatal, and suddenly the only authoritative leader of the Ostgoths was King Theodoric, in the future nicknamed the Great. Death caught up with Strabo in the middle of another revolt, when the Ostgoths demanded money and food, and in anticipation of the required wandered across the Balkans, ravaging towns and villages of the empire. Our Theodoric, having obtained rule both over his people and over the mercenary army of the Ostgoths in the empire, continued the practice of revolt and blackmail and applied it with success, once even laying siege to Constantinople. The Goths then blocked the drinking water going to the capital, and only a delegation, which included Theodoric's own sister, persuaded them to retreat from Constantinople and wait for the promised tribute. This state of affairs remotely reminded Italian expeditions of Goth's Alaric, when he finally took Rome, and did not suit Zeno, but he could at least every time find a common language with Theodoric, and officially the Iberian and Goth always called each other allies. The denouement came during the last, most protracted and large-scale rebellion of the commander Illus. Ill, an experienced commander and fellow countryman of the emperor several times, saved Zeno from overthrow, but burdened him with his influence and authority. Finally, after an attempt on his life, Illus preferred to remove from the capital to the east, having received the post of Magister Militum Orientis with extensive powers. Even despite the execution of the assassins, the new magister of the armies of the East realized that the assassination attempt was inspired by the upper power and planned a rebellion, for which he carefully prepared. It is known that the rebels negotiated with Armenians, Persians, Isaurians, Ostgoths, and even Odoacer's Italians. In the end, when it was no longer possible to hide the preparations, in the east of the empire, in the city of Tarsus was proclaimed Emperor Noble Syrian Leontius. The widow of Leo Machila, Verina called ill from the oblivion of exile, laid the crown on the new emperor and published a message in which she described the state to which Zeno brought the country and called on the people of the empire to support the new emperor. The message has spread on all provinces except capital, where Zenon's positions were unshakable. Relying on Isaurians, Ilus was able to defeat the first army sent against him. But soon the fragile alliance of dissatisfied with the central government broke up because of internal contradictions. Ilus encamped in a mountain fortress and held a siege until the year 488, solely because of the local Isaurian support for the rebellion, and after his defeat, Zeno ordered the razing of many fortresses in the mountains of Cappadocia. No one could reproach the Persians for consorting with the rebels. Such is the role of any major neighbor. There was no question of the neighboring Armenians. They remained behind the empire's borders and did not participate in the rebellion. The Ostgoths, who also did not openly support Illa, were nevertheless under suspicion and did not participate in suppressing the rebellion. As for Odoacer, Zeno decided to get even with him for negotiations with the rebels and began war in Byzantine way, stratifying unfriendly to him forces among themselves. Passages to Italy from the east reliably covered old allies and relatives of many of Odoacer's warriors. Rugi. King Philethius, with the wife Ostgothka named Gizo, received from Emperor Zeno clear instructions to break the alliance with Odoacer. In family there was a split. The brother of the king, ruling in one of Roman cities of Norica Ferderu, and did not want to hear about betrayal of parents in Italy. Philethius's son, named Friedrich, perhaps under the influence of his mother, favored a joint war with Constantinople and the Ostgoths against Odoacer. Ferderuk was murdered by Friedrich, under the pretext of revenge for ravaging the grave of a recently deceased priest, a highly respected Christian among the barbarians, Severin of Noric. The Rugians made their choice, but Odoacer instantly struck a preemptive strike, and in a brutal battle near the Vienna forest defeated the Rugian army, capturing and then executing Philetius and his wife. The surviving son, Frederick, has retreated with remnants of army on territory of Ostgoths, but when tried to return to the possessions has been again defeated by remaining brother Odoacer, and on it kingdom of Rugians has ceased to exist. Sometimes Theodoric the Great is called king of the Ostrogoths and Rugians. It is admissible, because Frederick has joined with the people to Theodoric, and has brought to it an oath of loyalty. Odoacer allowed to occupy the devastated lands allied to him tribe Gepidov, and retreated to Italy. In the fall, the Ostgoths of Theodoric moved in a great campaign to Italy. Emperor Zeno offered to punish the traitor by promising the Goth that he, after the victory over Odoacer for his labors, will rule instead of the emperor until he arrives there. That is, in fact, Theodoric officially received permission to rule in Italy, rich and famous province officially presented by the emperor to the barbarian. For Theodoric it was a chance to become a legitimate ruler of Italy forever, without any claims from neighbors in the future, for an official position in the empire, for the future not a brigand, but an independent and all-powerful official. The future would show that Byzantium had deceived his expectations, but for now it looked like a chance for which one could risk everything. Zeno gifted what he owned only on paper, and in exchange rid the Balkans of a large Ostgothic presence. Leaving, the Ostgoths dragged away with them all those who could. The war was expected not serious. Besides Frederick's Rugians, many Romans joined the invasion army. Theodoric even called the Goths, who lived in the Crimea, but they preferred to stay on their cozy peninsula. The way of the invasion army was blocked by the Gepids, who refused to let the Ostrogoths pass and fortified themselves on the river Ulka, guarding the road through the ford. A convenient position allowed the Gepids' small forces indefinitely long to hold back any number of Ostgoths, and those burdened with wagons with wives, children, and belongings could not find a way around. As a result, Theodoric was forced to personally participate in the epicenter of the battle, where the Ostgoths showed strength of character and turned the situation in their favor. The king of the Gepidians was killed, and the remnants of the army scattered. The Ostgoths captured a convenient camp with many supplies, where they settled down for wintering. Wintering of 100,000 horde of barbarians passed without special incidents. In the spring of 489th year, Theodoric with his army entered Italy, where he was already waiting for the army of Odoacer.